Hi folks, welcome to the wrap of June's science fiction reading. I had an ambitious TBR pile for the month and I didn't quite make it all the way through. The four that fell by the wayside were The Terraformers, Titan by John Varley, which is a shame, I really wanted to read that, The Star King, then the third of the Last King of Osternaard series. They didn't make it. They'll return to their respective shelves and live to fight another day. Let's take a look at the 10 books that I actually did read. I kicked off June's reading with The Tusks of Extinction by Nayler, he of last year's hit The Mountains in the Sea. This is a novella, it's a petite portion of pachyderm, if you like, for this is a tale of elephants, or more accurately of mammoths, their ancient woolly cousins. It's a slender book, quite small, quite short, quite fleet. We're introduced to Dr. Darmira Kismutalina, a scientist studying and trying to protect the last of the elephants, the regular elephants, in Africa, hunted to near extinction by poachers. And to cut to the chase, she is murdered by a poaching gang. And we skip forward then decades to find that mammoths have been reintroduced to the remote Russian taiga. But these mammoths are struggling to survive. They don't really know how to be mammoths. What is one to do? Well, handily, we can download an elephant expert into a mammoth. That'll sort it out. In this future, the technology for doing that exists. The good Dr. Darmira is now the matriarch of a herd of woolly mammoths, and there are hunters and other threats to the herd which Darmira, the Heffalump, must counter. This was a swift read, just a couple of hours. I enjoyed it, but being brief, it wasn't as satisfying or as chewy for me as his first book, Mountains in the Sea. Tusks of Extinction has some similarities in some respects. It's also an ecological warning with some futuristic high-tech trimmings. Both books have a good female protagonist and, I enjoyed it well enough. 7 out of 10, a planetary pleasure. Next, I devoured Mother of Eden by Chris Beckett, book 2 of the Eden trilogy. Eden is a dark planet. It's wandering interstellar space with no sun to call home. And as the name suggests, Eden does, however, support life. It is geothermally active and some lighting is provided by bioluminescence of both flora and fauna. Eden is now home to a community, actually several communities of humans, all descendants of 2 astronauts stranded several hundred years previously. The first book, Dark Eden, centred around a community of about 500 descendants, 150-ish years after the original stranding. Mother of Eden is set some generations later, and humanity is doing a pretty good job of spreading around Eden. As in Dark Eden, there are multiple points of view characters, and you have to be on your toes to clock the change in perspective with each chapter. The John folk settled across the sea, the world Pohl, and the David folk are on the nearer shore and in the hinterland, and the Jeff folk are a simple community living on an island. Where Dark Eden might have been a study of male power, the women are more at the fore in this book. Starlight Brooking is the main character, living simply on the island with the Jeff folk. She yearns for a bigger life, and on a visit to a David folk port, she meets Greenstone Johnson, the headman's son of the John folk community across the sea. Their eyes meet across a crowded market, and they find each other good, and she goes off with him to be his wife, the mother of their community. There ensues a lot of local politics. Starlight gets big ideas about reforming the Eden Heart community, that's now her home. Big ideas which the entrenched powers that be do not appreciate. All that happens in the first few chapters, and the rest of the book is a tale of Starlight's rise, her accumulation of power, all with an undercurrent of threat, of punishment, of revenge and of double-crossing. I really love being back in this world. I think Mother of Eden is quite different in character from Dark Eden, but in a good way. We get less close examination of the wildlife and the peril of living on the edge in a dangerous environment that came with Dark Eden. Things are more established, where a couple of hundred years down the line, there are towns, after a fashion, some basic technology, and the power structures are very different. Beckett does a great job, I think, painting a picture of life in the different communities, which vary from simple subsistence to communal living through to fairly ordered municipal life with money, councils, leaders, police or guards, religion, the whole 9 yards. But something is rotten at the heart of both the David folk and the John folk communities. I really like the Starlight character. She's smart and she manipulates with ease her weak new husband, and she has the common touch with the so-called small people in her new home. And although different in character to Dark Eden, I enjoyed the world building in this book too. It's really good stuff. I give Mother of Eden 9 out of 10. It's a galactic gem. Next, I visited the 1970s in the form of Man Plus by Frederick Pohl, and things are going to hell in a handcart on Earth. There is the ever-present threat of war, of climate disaster, of demagogues. Does that sound familiar at all? Salvation may come in the form of a project to upgrade a human so that they can survive in the hostile environments such as the surface of Mars. Roger Torroway is a scientist working on the project, but he quickly becomes the subject when the first one dies after being overstimulated by all of the cyborg inputs to his brain. We follow along as the super-invasive modifications are made to his body, his increasing isolation from his friends and his loved ones and from humanity in general. Only when Roger finally gets to Mars does his new body make sense, and he revels in the freedom and the ability that it gives him there. At just 220 pages, there's a lot packed into Man Plus. There's some love interest, some deception and betrayal, misadventures and setbacks, and there is a ghost in the machine, a mysterious third party that is observing progress, subtly influencing it. Who are they and what are their motivations? Are they friend or foe? I enjoyed Man Plus much more than Gateway, the other Frederick Pohl book that I read earlier this year. The protagonist is more likeable for a start, and there's a lot less hanging around doing nothing, the thing that mainly put me off of Gateway. I give Man Plus a solid 7 out of 10 then, a planetary pleasure. Next I read Land of the Headless by Adam Roberts. It's a short book by recent standards, under 300 pages, but there's an awful lot going on. The tale is told by the protagonist, John Kavala, a poet and musician, and it's set in a distant future where humanity has colonised a number of worlds. John lives in a world run on fundamentalist religious lines, a strange mashup of extreme Islam and extreme Christianity. The punishment for adultery, for rape, for murder and for blasphemy is death by beheading, which would normally be the end of things. But in these enlightened times, the consciousness of the condemned is downloaded into a wearable computer or an ordinator. Duly punished, the headless are then sent back into society to a life of prejudice, fear and menial labour. Meeting with a small group of other recently decapitated headless and joined by one charity worker, Susan, a nun of sorts, John and his companions resolve to walk for days to the nearest town to better themselves there. They reach the town after some privations on the journey, and whilst Susan is in a shop, the three headless are arrested and detained in the local police station. What follows seems borrowed from Kafka's The Trial. The men are bewildered to be accused of the crime of rape of their charity worker companion, Susan. Each denies it, each accuses one of the others. Their situation is perilous. The punishment for a headless for such a crime is final, death, separately from the headed. Out of alternatives, John heads off, no pun intended, to basic training. I think this is a great book. There's so much packed into it. I found the visual image of the headless people to be jarring in the extreme, the more so as the story is narrated by a headless who seems perfectly normal in his internal self. I caught a whiff of Catch-22 in this book too. Some of the military scenes are absurd and contradictory. There are 2 or 3 good twists along the way, some short-term and some longer-range, slow-burning twists that resolve very satisfactorily at the end of the book. I enjoyed it. It might be my favourite Adam Roberts so far. I give Land of the Headless 8 out of 10, a stellar splendour. Next was The Demolished Man. Alfred Bester asks the question, what would society be like if extrasensory perception was a thing? What if you could read another's mind, know their intentions, their motivations? What if only some people had this gift? And what if some of them are cops? This is the 24th century world that Alfred Bester imagines. Ben Reach is a wealthy industrialist. He's the boss of Monarch Utilities and Resources, and Reach is troubled by nightmares of the man with no face, and no amount of visits to psychologists can untrouble him. When a corporate merger doesn't go the way that Reach expects, he is triggered into murderous plans. But how do you commit a murder when people can literally read your mind? And how do you conceal your intentions? And even if you manage to do the deed, how do you get off scot-free afterwards if the cops can also read your mind? Reach has this sussed out, or he thinks he does. Best laid plans and all that, things go wrong, there is a witness. The final half-ish of the book is a cat-and-mouse game between Reach and straight-laced Esper cop Lincoln Powell. The Demolished Man was one of the first science fiction books that I ever read, and it was fun to revisit it now, 40-odd years later. The story moves along pretty briskly, and I think that Bester does a great job painting a picture of how an Esper-enabled society might work, and his vision of the future is also fun. There's a 10 o'clock rocket to Venus, for example. It's an impressive debut novel, I think, and it won the first Hugo Award. I was really pleased to revisit this story, but it didn't blow my socks off. I give The Demolished Man a solid 7 out of 10, another planetary pleasure. Next was Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio, 3rd book in the Sun Eater series, which I have been enjoying immensely this year. I really enjoyed being back in this universe. If you like a widescreen epic space opera, and if relentlessly alien aliens, well-drawn characters, a complex deep history, breathtaking close-quarter battle scenes, alien relics, a flawed but interesting protagonist, and a lush prose style float your boat, then I think that these books are for you. In Demon in White, we rejoin Hadrian Marlowe and his Red Company in orbit around Forum, the seat of imperial power in the Solon Empire. After his victories in the previous book, he is equal parts fated and envied by the great and the good. The Emperor has plans for his latest Victorian night, and Hadrian and company are sent off on a mission with little chance of success. At best, a wild goose chase, and at worst, a death trap, a no-win situation. And to add to the fun, Hadrian is asked to take one of the Emperor's sons, Alexander, with him. Another risk factor that Hadrian can do without. The mission is to track down a Legion battle group lost in space and presumed attacked by the Cielcin, the aliens of the piece. There's an extended hand-to-hand battle scene in this section which really takes your breath away. Marlowe returns to glory and the highest honours, including potentially the hand of the Emperor's daughter in marriage. The nest of snakes that is the Emperor's court does not appreciate Hadrian's meteoric rise, and someone, or someones, wants him dead and try repeatedly to make it so. And all of that happens in just the first section of the book. I really like the depth of these books, the tantalising glimpses of the deep history of the empire, and I enjoy the political machinations and the obvious borrowings from empires of old Earth, including the British Empire. It kind of tickles my fancy to imagine some scion of the British royal family being at the head of efforts to vanquish the Americani and their runaway robots and AIs. I really like the relationship between Hadrian and Valka, by now his long-standing paramour, a relationship of equals, and she more than holds her own. And I continue to enjoy the narrative style of the book. It's told from the future by Marlowe as an old man writing his memoirs, and we know how the story ends because it's telegraphed clearly on page 1 of book 1. I've really enjoyed Hadrian's maturing over the course of the books, helped greatly by substantial time jumps between the books. And it was interesting to have Alexander to provide contrast. He reminded me of an impetuous, entitled young Hadrian. I really enjoyed this book and I'm impatient to read the next one. I give Demon in White 9.5 out of 10, a slam dunk galactic gem. Next, I read Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which was published earlier this year. We follow Professor Anton Dardev, a xenobiologist who has been sentenced to hard time on Kiln, an exoplanet with a lush but extremely incompatible ecosystem. The government back on Earth, the mandate, it is strongly hinted, is authoritarian and permits only an orthodoxy of thought in all walks of life. Professor Dardev, like many of the inmates, is a political prisoner on Kiln. An undercurrent of revolution and civil disobedience runs deep, but the secret police spend their time rooting it out, sending the culprits off-world. The gulag to which Dardev is sent is harshly run, and grisly examples are made of people that step out of line or exhibit unorthodox thinking. I read Cage of Souls during May, and I was strongly reminded of that book whilst reading Alien Clay. There are several parallels. An academic is sent to a labour camp for some perceived threat or insult to the authorities. The prison is isolated, it's run on harsh lines by a capricious warder, and the wildlife is weird and lushly described, and all is not as it seems out there. That nagging sense of familiarity bothered me quite a bit. I couldn't help feeling that Alien Clay was a bit of a retread, a facsimile. But worst of all, it just wasn't as good as Cage of Souls. I really enjoyed Cage of Souls, but Alien Clay left me a little bit cold in comparison. That said, it's not true to say that I didn't enjoy it. I did, up to a point. There was quite a lot of world building, and that was very good. The alien wildlife was well imagined and drawn, with sufficient detail to give a good idea how it all worked. I think Adrian Tchaikovsky does that very well, and he's done it in several different books. I really like their composite critters in this book, their component parts assembled in one way with one species and a different way with another. Some of the human characters were also pretty good, but there was a distinct lack of plot, and what there was maybe a wee bit predictable. World building and characters are all well and good, but surely they should be subordinate to the story itself. Like I say, I did enjoy it, I just didn't love it. I give Alien Clay 7 out of 10, a planetary pleasure. Next was House of Suns by Alastair Reynolds, on audiobook this time. This was not on my planned TBR for the month, so we'll call it a bonus extra. This was a reread for me. I first read it way back, probably 15 years ago when it was first published, and I barely remembered anything about it. The Gentian line are clones of Abigail Gentian. There's 1,000 of them, known as Shatterlings. They are harvesters and traders of knowledge, perambulating around the galaxy on some cosmic tour. Travelling at close to the speed of light, they spend much of their travel time in hibernation, and thousands of years pass. Civilizations rise and fall. By the time of the book, the Shatterlings measure their age in millions of years. Every now and again they gather to synchronise their collective knowledge troves and meld their memories. The line has rules, and among those rules are don't be late and don't consort with fellow Shatterlings. Campion and Purslane are in double trouble then. They are about 50 years late to the reunion and will arrive together, their ongoing relationship a badly kept secret. They arrive, however, to find scenes of destruction, distress calls and ambush, and barely escaping with their lives and a few Gentian refugees. Their line is reduced to a few dozen chatterlings. The story proceeds from there to incorporate a lengthy visit to the ancient world of Naum, and then goes galactic again for the climactic ending. Who has attacked the Gentian line and why? What or who is the mysterious House of Suns and what do they want? Can the Gentian line rebuild? There's a lot to like in this book. There are machine people, betrayals, a murder, secrets to be uncovered, wormholes, star dams, transcended humans, a strange phenomenon in nearby galaxies. They vanished, which may also go on to affect the Milky Way. I enjoyed revisiting this book. I liked the enormous scale of it. There's an old-fashioned car chase scene, but with spaceships travelling at 99% of the speed of light. A chase that covers enormous distances, 60,000 light years, much of it spent in abeyance or hibernation. There's a parallel story thread of which we only get short glimpses at the beginning of each section of the book, which I also really enjoyed. It's a 6 million year flashback to the 31st century, and this covers the childhood of Abigail Gentian and her eventual decision to be cloned and sent out into the galaxy. This is a book of ideas, some plausible if mind-bending science and scale, enormous scale. I'm very happy to have gone back for seconds with this book, and I enjoyed it, and I think it's one of Reynolds' better books. I give House of Suns 8 out of 10, a stellar splendour. Next was A Deepness in the Sky by Vernor Vinge. This is set in the same zones of thought universe as A Fire Upon the Deep, which I read last year and really loved. I enjoy Vernor Vinge's writing style. It's very manageable, there's nothing too tricky or clever about it. And in this book, two separate human groups converge on the so-called on-off star, which goes through a decades-long cycle of burning bright and then fading to dimness. The Cheng Ho are an interstellar trading house nurturing customer civilizations to provide trading and refit opportunities, whilst the Emergent are an autocratic faction bent on expanding their empire. Meanwhile, on the only planet orbiting this on-off star, we're introduced to the spider civilization, the indigenous sapient species. The human factions are quickly at loggerheads and fight each other to a standstill early in the book, leaving both remnants stranded in the system. The bulk of the story then follows the humans as they're forced to collaborate to survive the decades they must wait before the spiders are advanced enough to refit their broken starships, whose progress is another thread in the story. I really like this book. I enjoyed the world building on the spider planet, which we experienced through human spyware and translations, and I enjoyed the various spider characters as they drive their civilization forward, taking radical and not always popular steps to better deal with the extended period of dark when the star is dim. I liked the subterfuge among the human factions, the gradually revealed secret evil plans of the smarmy Emergents, and the very slow burn plans of Pham and others on the Cheng Ho side to regain control. Things build to a crescendo across three parallel threads until they crash together with a bang at the end. I really enjoyed myself. I give A Deepness in the Sky a solid 8 out of 10, a stellar splendour. The final book I read in June was Burning Chrome by William Gibson. This is a collection that contains 10 short stories, 3 of which are collaborations with other authors, John Shirley, Bruce Sterling and Michael Swanwick. This was my first William Gibson and I enjoyed it. The stories straddle the publication date of Neuromancer, his 1984 debut novel. And it's worth remembering that personal computers were a rarity, that with DOS only introduced in 1981, the year that Johnny Mnemonic, the first story in the collection, was published. We barely had green screen text interfaces. The internet wasn't yet a thing. Windows was still a twinkle in Bill Gates' eyes, and email didn't really exist. There was no social media, no trolls, nothing. But nonetheless, Gibson envisaged a world of cyber attacks, of brain-computer interfaces, online communications, virtual reality, body hacks. That's a really remarkable leap of imagination. He wasn't the first. There were other writers that envisaged an online future, but Gibson probably put the punk in cyberpunk. These are dark, seedy tales of the grimy underworld, threaded with noir sensibilities with added attitude and electronics. 2 or 3 of the stories are set in the world that Gibson later created with the Sprawl trilogy, of which Neuromancer is the first. I particularly enjoyed the Molly Millions character and the heist story in the titular Burning Chrome, which bookend the collection. I enjoyed my time here and I'll definitely be back for more. Overall, I give Burning Chrome 8 out of 10, another stellar splendour. All of which means that my book of the month, by just a smidgen, was Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio. Both Sun Eater and the Eden trilogy would definitely make it into a revised top 10 series, and I might have to do a new video later this year. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.